Great. So it's the second day of the World Leaders Summit that's taking place here at COP29 in actually very nice Baku here in Azerbaijan. And the leaders have been presenting their national statements, and we'll try and keep you up to date on that later in the day. Let's now go to a session hosted by the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, one of our great friends and great partners. Joining me, there we go, in the studio and on stage are Johan Falk, who's the CEO and the co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and Lord Adair Turner, who is chair of the Energy Transitions Commission. Yeah, if you say Transition Commission, means you're just sending the stuff around the place, yeah? Commission, or ETC. Okay, this session is entitled Exponential Race to the Top, Actions, Finance, Policy. Johan, can you start us off by explaining what you mean when you speak of an exponential race to the top?
Yeah, thanks for being here again. Great to be here. As you know, science is clear. We need to halve emissions by 2030 to have an opportunity to stay within 1.5, and we are definitely not on track. We all know that. One reason for that is that we are not scaling up the solutions to shift out the fossil economy sufficiently fast. We know renewable energy, electrical vehicles are scaling exponentially. But we have a number of solutions that we need to take over the tipping point, following a similar trajectory as in the Moore's law that we are inspired of, basically moving exponentially. Now, the good news is about 90% of the economy has some kind of net zero targets. Another thing is that companies that we are working with have both set science-aligned targets and starting to implement what we call transition plans, and even better, integrating that in their business strategy. Now, we have a movement on the national side also setting so-called NDCs, which has to move to transition plans as well. Where we see the real opportunity is actually where we can align now these strong transition plans of accelerating what we call climate solutions to shift out the fossil economy with the national plans. Then we can achieve this exponential race to the top. So moving a bit from sharing of burdens to actually winning the new opportunities.
Okay.
That's the thinking.
Good. So it's over now to you, Lord Adair Turner. Your recent report from the ETC, which, just to remember, is the Energy Transitions Commission, highlighted countries could triple the ambition of their NDCs, their national climate action plans that they're revising, simply by reflecting technological progress and already existing policy commitments. But we've not really seen much ambition quite yet in the few NDCs, national climate plans, that have already been submitted so far. In your engagements around the globe, where do you sense a race to the top might be happening, of a country wanting to win the new clean energy economy rather than looking to just share a burden?
I think what's interesting is we have some technologies where the sort of exponential growth that we want to see in the use of that technology and the cost reduction, which is sort of exponential in the other direction, has undoubtedly occurred. I mean, what has happened, driven fundamentally by China on solar PV costs, storage battery costs, EV costs, is extraordinary. And I don't think there's been enough response of that from the rest of the world. I think if you look at the European automotive industry, they were guilty for quite a long time of precisely the inverse, by saying, oh, it won't really happen, it will be delayed, and they've been late to the party, but trying to play catch up. If you take those positive technologies, there are many, many countries in the world which could now accelerate, in particular, the decarbonization of their power systems, but are not yet doing it. Let me give you an example. If you take Indonesia, I think if you look at the sunshine that falls on Indonesia and the current cost of solar PV plus batteries, absolutely enormous opportunity to say we are now going to put solar PV plus batteries all over the country. So we're not seeing enough so far, but we have seen China take a very strong leadership position. We are seeing very interesting follow-ons now. We're seeing a huge expansion of, for instance, electric two-wheelers across Africa. Interesting development this year. Major development of EVs in Thailand. The UK, interestingly, one of the countries which has come out with a strong NDC, committing to have net zero electricity by 2030.
Right.
It's going to be a stretch, but it is going to force the UK to develop some technologies of how you integrate grids, which will then be applicable across the rest of the world. So we hope we will see this tightening of NDCs, both to reflect the technological possibilities, but also to reflect somewhere countries already have policies in place, but they haven't yet reflected them in the NDCs.
Right.
But this process of NDCs is very important, because the more that one country is ambitious, it will inspire other countries to be ambitious as well.
Okay, super. Johan, any comments on this?
Yeah, there I think the business community can really need to step up in actually communicating to nations and countries what is the economical opportunity to actually grab these new solutions, which can be reflected in economical growth and wealth, because all this transformation is happening through value chains. And the frontline companies need, of course, renewable energy. They need low carbon transportation in order to achieve their targets. We need to link that to the national transition plans, so countries really see it as an opportunity either to win or to lose out on these opportunities. I think that can shift the ball game a lot.
Interesting. We've got a few more minutes before we need to just transition. We're certainly going to dig a bit deeper into finance a little bit later in this session, when you'll be back on stage. But Lord Adair, Turner, do you think, apart from the countries you've mentioned, and you mentioned Africa as well with two-wheelers, there are some bright little lights as well also on the African continent in terms of Kenya with green energy now,
Well, we're seeing, for
on.
instance, Namibia
Yeah.
and Morocco,
Yeah.
two countries undoubtedly grabbing hold of the opportunity for them to develop green electricity, zero carbon electricity, and green hydrogen, and then to be major exporters of it. And this is actually illustrating to us that there are going to be new sources of competitive advantage in the future. If you ask where is the iron making of the world concentrated, a lot of it is where there was coking coal 100 years ago. But that's not the logical place to put iron making in future. The logical place to put iron making in future, the cheapest place to put iron making, may well be in the places which are drenched in sunlight. So Namibia is really setting out to grab that green hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, fertilizers, maybe iron making. Morocco also is seizing the opportunity to be a provider of hydrogen or directly of electrons by high voltage cables into Europe. So there are a set of new opportunities around the world, particularly for countries which are drenched in sunshine. And by the way, that is most of Africa. Most of Africa has incredibly high, it's not entirely true of things like the Congo Basin where you have a large cloud cover, but a hell of a lot of northern, eastern and southern Africa has the most extraordinary solar resources. And the cost of solar PV panels has got now so cheap that this is a huge opportunity that they ought to be seizing.
You just mentioned something which really made me smile, because I remember all these debates in the EU, right, where they used to say, why is Scotland growing tomatoes when they grow perfectly well in nice sunshine in Italy?
Yeah.
You're right, the coking places don't have to be
Well, I was brought up in Scotland, and I have to tell you, the local tomatoes never really got deep red.
No, they never got
They
deep red,
stopped
yeah.
off at about orange.
They should just have been. Last few points. We've just got 1 minute and 10 seconds before we move on, Johan.
I think we need these brilliant examples of both countries as well as value chains and companies going in the absolute front line to inspire the other ones that this will be a race. And it's about, if we're shifting out 90% of the economy, do you want to be part of that, or do you want to be left with the old one? When you get that thinking, we can get that positive race So I think that is incredibly important. Show the examples, but also connect the economical opportunity between the nations and countries and the business and the value chains to see that how they interlink.
Yeah, I've got it. Good. I think we're just coming to a new section here. Let's move on. So we've got two more fantastic guests here with us at the Exponential Roadmap show, if I can put it that way, this afternoon, here live from Baku in Azerbaijan at COP29. And they are Siriam Rajagopal of Inter-IKEA Group. Again, we always ask, we might have to explain to the audience the difference between Inter-IKEA Group and IKEA, because they're not all Swedish, and Jenny Cato of Scania, a well-known and very large truck manufacturer. Don't need to really explain that. We were going to have Vivian Romero on of the Brazilian Business Initiative, CEBDS, but I think she's been unfortunately detained somewhere. So this happens, but we have 15 minutes, so let's enjoy it. Jenny, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what actions your company is taking to win the race to the top of the clean economy?
Well, thank you very much for presuming that. Well, you know, we decided already 10 years ago to drive the shift towards a sustainable transport system, acknowledging, of course, that we are part of the problem, so we need to be part of the solution. And doing that, we have to invest a lot, and we have. So we are now spending more than half than in our R&D budget on electrification. So we chose electrification as our main technology track to change this transportation system, because, I mean, we're into the biggest shift since we went from horse and carriage to combustion engine, and now we're going from combustion engine to an electrical driveline, which is much more efficient, of course, and also CO2 emission free. So we have more engineers nowadays in software than we have in mechanical engineering, and we have invested in battery assembly plant in Södertälje, etc. So that is kind of our main track for getting the emissions down, and that is what we're now trying to get the politicians and policymakers to kind of enable as well.
Yeah, good point. Because you can't just have a whiz-bang brilliant idea like a super unbelievable electric truck or trucks, right? I mean, you need others in the ecosystem of a country and of a region like the EU, but also worldwide, to actually buy into this with regulation, yeah?
Yeah.
What are you finding? Is it still very patchy, this regulation on the electricity and the trucks?
Yes, I mean, it is patchy, and it's also, you have to think about this as an ecosystem, right? So we are the vehicle manufacturer and provider, but there needs to be other actors in this ecosystem. So charging infrastructure, there are grid operators and grid owners that need to kind of get the grid into, or the cables into the ground to get the connections to the charging stations that we also need to build. There need to be access to green electricity. There also need to be a customer in the end that wants to buy our products. There need to be transport buyers to also demand our customers on sustainable transports. And
I think this is where the connection is coming
exactly.
with IKEA in a second.
Yes.
But yeah, you're absolutely right on that.
So I think we need the policies. There need to be kind of a holistic view and a systems approach to regulations and policies, which there isn't really today. I mean, we have really heavy regulations in Europe right now from the heavy-duty commercial vehicle side. So we will get actually heavily penalized if we can't fulfill the 2030 goals. At the same time, there are no other kind of sanctions for in the other part of the ecosystem to get the ramp up going.
Right. So if a government says we're going to have, you know, XYZ number of charging points, and then they don't sort of enable the delivery of such a thing, then there's no sanctions against the government,
Exactly.
is there? Okay, well, that's a good point, actually. I wish we had a government representative here right
I
now.
wish that too.
Next time we'll get one. Okay, so Sriram, how do you say it? Sriram?
You can call me Sri.
Sri, is
Yeah.
that easier?
Yes.
Is it Sriram?
Sriram.
Ah, there we
Yeah.
go. Okay. So, tell us a little bit. So, what action is IKEA taking within this context? Yeah, explain a little bit.
So when it comes to the race to the top, IKEA is looking at this as an opportunity as a business opportunity, an economic advantage to be an early mover in this space, both for an economic opportunity and also something to build business resilience for us as a business. So IKEA is a global home furnishings company which has been around for 80 years, and we need to make sure we need to do everything possible to secure our existence as a brand for another 80 years and beyond. So that's for us is the framing of the whole, that's for us is the premise for why this whole agenda is important. How we have gotten started is setting clear goals, clear commitments aligned to the science of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we will be halving emissions across the whole value chain. So that's from extraction of materials till customers use our products at their home. So we have set goals across the whole value chain, and we will halve emissions leading to 2030, and we will get to net zero by FY50. So that for us is how we are signaling a clear commitment from a private sector perspective, which we hope, and we also have clear transition plans to back that up, transition plans for each part of the business. So how do we design products, how do we manufacture products, how do we transport products, how do we set stores across the world, how do we deliver products to our customers, how do our customers use our products. So we have transition plans for each part of the business.
Right.
And then we are hoping that this would enable policymakers to, we are one part of it. It will take two to tango. So from a private sector perspective, we are putting together these demand signals then for policymakers and governments to also do their part.
Interesting. Let's go a little bit further with this. Vivian, maybe you answered this before, but actually no, you're not Vivian, so we have to forget about Vivian. Actually, do you have electric trucks in the Brazilian area as well? Do you have electric trucks in Brazil? Does Scania have?
We have electrical buses, actually.
Aha!
Yeah.
So we could talk about Brazil, but we won't do that right now. But we were hoping to have Brazil on the show with us here right now. But yeah, okay. So you're driving the transformation through the value chains, right, Jenny? And if you were trying to tell an ordinary person what that means, driving, this transition through the value chains, what actually you must have to go through a lot of effort and a lot of work to do this, but try and explain what does it mean and what is the kind of dream outcome of this? Yeah?
Yes. So I mean, first of all, we have both upstream and downstream transition as well, even though, I mean, if we look at our kind of CO2 emissions, most of them, over 90% actually comes from Scope 3 when our products are in use. So that's where we're going into electrical trucks. But also there is, of course, material going into the truck.
Yes.
And we also set quite stringent targets on ourselves to greenify these supply chains. So for the 4 hotspots that we call it, so it's batteries, it's steel, it's cast iron and aluminum, we will have green steel and green batteries, etc., 100% 2030 in the European system. So that's also something, using our purchasing power and putting demand on our suppliers. And that was also what I'm talking about then in the kind of the downstream. So for us, doing this transition, investing this billions of euros into this transition means that we need, it needs to be a good business case for our customers in the end. And to start off, as any new technology, we need policy incentives to do this, to start off with. I mean, we need these incentives in all kind of parts of the value chain. So as for a customer, they ask us 2 things. What does it cost? And why is it's more expensive than a regular diesel truck? So how can we kind of overcome that capex? And also, where can I charge my new, brand new electric truck? And that is these 2, because, we also have to differ between trucks and passenger cars.
Yes.
A truck is not a big passenger car, so it's a totally different use case. I mean, it's a tool that you use professionally and has to have an uptime of a certain amount. So, I mean, there's so many challenges in this, and also it's not only about the range. You know, we talk about range anxiety on the passenger, exactly.
Yes.
But I mean, for our customers, it's also about the payload and how much you can transport, the goods you can transport, and what distances, etc. So, what we are now trying to do, not only asking policymakers for a lot of things, we're also trying to get into different parts of the value chain ourselves. So we have a joint venture with our competitors, for example, Volvo and Daimler, on building charging infrastructure for trucks in Europe.
Right.
Setting up 1,700 charging points across Europe. We had one inauguration in Sweden a couple of months ago. We're also investing in a depot charging company. It's also that we are operating ourselves, helping our customers to build depot charging so they can charge overnight. And we're also trying to get into some innovative business models where we can, in another joint venture that we have, UNA, provide transport as a service to kind of take the risk of investing in a truck. So you can just, as a transporter or transport buyer, buy transport as a service or vehicle as a service.
So it's like not owning the truck. You can have access to the
Yes.
truck when you need it, like you do with car sharing. Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting. In I think it's Barcelona or Madrid. Maybe it's Barcelona. They're using the heat from the metro stations there. You probably know about this, to create not only create electricity for the metro station, but now they're creating it for the charging points in the nearby car parks in the metros. So there's all kinds of funky technology happening right now, and it's kind of which one do you go for as a joint venture? You know, it's really exciting. On the financing side, are there particular policies as well from your side as IKEA that you really need to keep you up late at night, or you feel that there needs to be more of something in that vein?
From a financing perspective, the biggest thing that needs to happen is removal of fossil fuel subsidies.
Right.
The cheapest form of energy today is already solar. The reason why it's because fossil fuels have the crutches of subsidies. Renewables don't have a level playing field as such. So if that happens as a starting point, that will lend business cases to be very competitive on its own, and that will spur acceleration of actions across the whole value chain. So so that for us is the first thing that we would really need as such. And then we also need financing in a sense, and we work with more than 1,000 suppliers in developed markets as well as developing countries and underdeveloped countries as well. In many cases, private sector need to do, and we can do our part in trying to work and provide the financing needed for our suppliers. And for example, we have a 100 million euro financing program for suppliers where we provide loans to suppliers to accelerate their journey. But that itself is not a silver bullet by itself, and we can't do everything on our own. And we see that public governments, the multilateral banks, they all need to also do their part to make sure that financing is available at good terms. And this is the finance COP. So we are hoping that there is an action and there is a good agreement at the end of COP on how the financing would be made available to all these other countries. And then we also need financing also in developed countries on topics like regenerative agriculture, for example.
Yeah, that's so important.
And for us, food is very important. It's almost 3 to 4% of our overall footprint. And when we transition from traditional forms of agriculture to regenerative agriculture, and it takes time for the benefits to manifest. So in the meantime, who bears the burden of the costs? Again, private sector will do their part. But we also need to see a solution on how governments can also and other organizations can step in to support the whole decarbonization journey.
So, you know, we're going to have to wrap this up in a couple of minutes, but I just think this whole, I mean, I think I mentioned you before, but I find the whole ecosystem and the kind of potential virtuous relationships between different parts of the supply chain all trying to actually reduce their emissions quite interesting. And, you know, maybe this isn't your part of IKEA, but I think it's this week announced that that some companies like IKEA, Patagonia and others were looking for shippers, people shipping goods around the world to ship with cleaner fuels in the ships. And of course there was an announcement in Glasgow about shipping, and I think Hapag Lloyd in Germany won the tender among this consortium of companies to use not the most eco-friendly fuels, but quite close, or certainly better than the bunker fuels, in some of the shipping that it's now going to do for IKEA and Patagonia and the whole list of other companies. So it really is an interesting relationship that can happen, pushed by business wanting to reduce their emissions, getting others to join in. You know, I think this is really cool. Okay, I think we're coming towards the end of this section here. I wonder if we could move on and say goodbye to our guests. If we could move on, ladies and gentlemen. So from actions and policy, let's turn to the topic of finance again and really dig in here. And let me welcome Ariana Griffer of the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. I'm told my script I have to pronounce this IIGCC. Okay, I've done it. And again we have Lord Adair Turner, Chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, or ETC, and again, very happy to see Johan Falk, CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. So I'm going to go to Adair first. You spoke earlier about capital investment needs for the zero carbon economy. Which financial actor needs to play what role here?
Well, the answer is it differs by type of country.
Okay.
If we're talking about rich developed countries, the vast majority of the investment will come from the private sector. And the crucial thing for governments is to have the appropriate policies that create the incentives for the private financial institutions to provide money. So that's about carbon prices, regulations, power market structures, that planning and permitting systems that create good opportunities for private finance to finance. There is still a role for public balance sheets, I think, in even rich developed countries to do the sort of first of a kind risky things that maybe the private sector won't want to do immediately, but it's primarily private finance. There's then a spectrum according to the income level of the country, the sophistication of its capital markets, its savings rates, and that spectrum is one of a gradual increasing role for public institutions, so that when you get to lower income countries, there has to be quite a lot of the work has got to be done by multilateral development banks and other forms of official financial institution who've got to create projects, help manage the risk down, and then the private sector will come in behind that. So it is a spectrum of very different mixes of countries across the world.
Okay. Ariana, you represent institutional investors. What role do they play?
Well, I could not agree more with Lord Adair Turner about, each investors will have a different role to play. In particular, institutional investors are there to provide the sort of a large capital that is needed to really move the needle and finance the transition, particularly when it comes to sort of large infrastructure that are needed for the transition. So we're talking about obviously renewable energies, grids network, hydrogen, anything that is really needed as an infrastructure to facilitate the transition. And as Lord Turner has mentioned, you know, the role of the private sector might be more limited in developing countries where a lot of the public finance and the multilateral development banks will come in to sort of strategically facilitate the mobilization of finance. But there's still a role that institutional investors could play there. And we have really good examples already in place of asset owners, so pension funds, coming in and forming strategic partnerships with multilateral development banks to facilitate that private finance coming into projects in developing countries. And these are done in a series of different ways, through blended finance models, through partnership models as well. But I think, yeah, I just want to put shine a light on the aspect of collaboration and partnership to make sure that these investors are part of the transition.
Okay. So we're talking about the exponential race to the top, Ariana. This is what the session's all about, to win the new clean economy, right? What do these national climate plans, these revised nationally determined contributions that are going on right now in the run-up to next year's COP30 in Brazil, what do they do? How do they attract investment? How do they help countries win this race?
No, thank you for the question. And I think we are at the moment in a very, very strategic opportunity for countries and investors to come together around these national climate plans. First of all, there's an opportunities for countries to actually lay out ambitious national climate and development goals. And this is really the time to start thinking about that and in the next sort of like decade. And secondly, there's an opportunity from the finance side to actually understand where the opportunities are in that specific country and where investors can come in to finance the transition. What is not happening with the previous national climate plans or NDCs is that they're not really communicating these to the private sector, to businesses and to finance. So we really need to use this opportunity to actually provide more of the details, more of the information that investors can actually use to identify these opportunities and also co-create some of these investment opportunities with countries.
I'm going to come to you just in 1 second on that. I mean, just with respect, and I just want to add this, there was a great effort by the United Nations to try and communicate these investment plans to the private sector. But did the private sector listen, or were they just so badly communicated even when the UN tried that it didn't make any sense?
Look, well, earlier this year, we actually worked with some of our members across asset managers and asset owners to actually understand how investors are using NDCs, if at all. Are they looking at it when they're doing the sort of financial analysis? And the answer is that yes, they are looking at it, but at the moment, it only gives the sort of high-level target, decarbonization target.
It's not granular.
It's not granular.
Okay.
And what is needed is actually given that granular details around how the transition is going to look like across the economy and where you expect the private sector to come in and take some of those opportunities.
Okay.
I think this is a really crucial point. At the moment, if you read through NDCs, and I have read through a large number of NDCs earlier this year for a report which we produced at the ETC in about July, you really can't, for most of them, get a sense of where the financial investment opportunities are. Because you often get a very high-level statements, statements which don't be clear what is the plan for the decarbonisation of different sectors of the economy. It doesn't go through to, well, how much investment might be needed and how much does that country think might come from domestic savings and how much might come from outside.
Right.
Now, NDCs are nationally determined. They are, to a degree, voluntary. But I think the crucial distinction we've got to make is that we're going to have to keep the idea that the actual quantity reduction target is voluntary, but we should try to get more standardization on what they actually say on the format. And the encouragement needs to be, if you develop your NDCs in this format with greater secular granularity, greater links to which of your policies do you think are supporting it, where do you think you need financial help or not, that I think will help make it much easier for that to be something that the private sector can look at and say, given that the country's said that, I can see that there's an investable opportunity bound to be in this area or that area.
Johan, come in here on this.
Yeah, completely agree that what is really essential is to have, like, we can call it transitional plans on national level, highlighting how you will drive the energy system, the transportation system, regenerative agriculture, forestry, etc., broken down on these key opportunities for transformation, because then you can link it to the value chains, where we see now a very strong interest from many companies that if you're going in the front line to transform your value chain, we see that some of the blockers are really in that we don't have sufficient progressive policies on a national level to actually enable that acceleration and scaling. So I think there is a brilliant opportunity to do that connection and then link it to finance as well.
It's a fabulously interesting topic, this. I mean, we have we have like another 6 minutes on this, I believe. And I think it's worth knowing or noting that this is the crucial time, as you said, because the Climate Policy Initiative out of London brought out a report just recently on the amount of climate finance flowing around the world. It's still a fraction of what is needed for getting us on track to, we can come in. This is just 1 second. I'm just going to say, no, please let me finish and then come in, because they say it's a fraction. Maybe they're wrong, but it doesn't seem to add up to the 10 or 12 or 11 trillion dollars, 13 trillion dollars we need by, say, 2030 to move us up to 2050. And if that's the case, then what has the international community been doing in the last 10 years to get countries ready to actually deliver since Paris, right? This is for 8 years, isn't it, since Paris?
Well, do you want to go first?
Yes, please.
How many hours do we have?
I think the focus of this COP, and we've heard this from the Secretary General of the UNFCCC, is very much about implementation.
Yeah.
In the past years, countries have been putting forward their NDCs, their targets, but now we need to move from setting these targets to actually implementing. And there's no implementation without capital. That's why this COP is the finance COP. We need the capital to implement those targets, but that capital is not going to flow if the policy frameworks are not in place. So again, underlying what is already been told, having that sort of credibility of the policy framework and also regulatory actions that countries need to take to achieve those targets, the headline target and the targets at a sectoral level, is what then really unlock the capital in different countries and in different sectors as well.
Because there's loads of capital around the world sitting around in bank accounts doing very little right now. It could be put to some good, couldn't it?
Well, money doesn't sit around in bank accounts doing nothing, because
Okay,
that
fine.
bank account on the liability side of the bank is matched by loans on the other side of the bank. So, look, I do think it's important for us to get some figures clear on this and what fractions we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Our figures and the IEA figures of how much we need to invest by the late 2020s are not 11 or 13 trillion. They're more like 4 to 5 trillion, and the difference between 4 and 5 is how do you treat the purchase of passenger electric vehicles. You could say that's not an investment, and indeed they're going to end up being cheaper than ICEs. That's why you'll see big swing factors. Figure we work on is about 4 trillion, offset by about 0.5 trillion less per year invested in fossil fuels. That was about $1 trillion. That investment in the new economy we need in 2020. And according to the IEA figures, that has already gone up to about 1.5 trillion. The challenge so far is that almost all of the increase has been in China, Europe, and the US, stimulated by the Inflation Reduction Act. It has not been in the broad mass of upper middle, lower income countries. That is where I would agree we are at a small fraction rather than a large fraction. It is stepping up at the pace which is required in parts of the rich developed world and China, but where we are lacking is we're not seeing it yet in Indonesia, in Brazil, in lots and lots of those middle income countries, let alone in really low-income countries like, for instance, much of Sub-Saharan Africa.
With the Climate Policy Initiative, their numbers cover all the sectors of the global economy, from agriculture through to
I think you'll still be,
outlays.
you won't get to 13 trillion as an investment need.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
Yeah.
You may if you add adaptation needs, you may if you add loss and damage.
Exactly,
You
yeah.
may if you talk about the wider pursuit of the sustainable development goals. But
Yes.
you know, it's important to try and get figures which are large and comprehensive, but without just chucking everything in to have an even bigger
Yes.
figure.
Okay, very good.
The other crucial thing is 70% of all the investment required, 70% of all the investment required is in the power sector. Always come back to that. The biggest thing we need to do is build a much bigger, totally decarbonized power sector.
Right. Johan, do you want to come in on this?
I do think there is a difference compared to 10 years ago. Is actually that a lot of the solutions that didn't exist at that point in time, we didn't have we haven't passed the tipping point for renewable energy and electrical vehicles, and now we can actually show that these are following exponential trajectories. We have a lot of new solutions which are left to the tipping point but needs to be accelerated. So I think it's a huge difference. I would claim that we would have the solutions to take us to the second halving, but they're not accelerate sufficiently fast. I also think that for particular technologies, we also need more investments, public and private investments. I work with mobile telephony, internet and everything previously, and I don't think we would have had these technologies without also the combination of public investments in the initial phases of some of these demanding technologies as well.
Yep.
I think this is actually to go back to the developing countries point. This is even more important when it comes to developing countries, where actually the cost of capital for the same technologies that are now here so cheap actually still makes it so much more expensive to implement in those countries. So therefore, we do really need public interventions to enable the transition in developing countries, and we cannot forget about them, because we need to bring everyone across with the transition, as this really poses like global systemic risk to the whole financial system.
Good. We need to wrap up here. Hopefully next year we'll see even more action on this and even more climate finance flows rocketing around the world and making this a better planet. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.